folks. This is Seventh Song, and this is part 3 of the Herbal Street Medicine series. And the goals of these classes is to help people understand how to use herbal medicine and other tools and just other awarenesses while working at protests. So this is in support of protesters. This is in support of change. This is in support of making the United States and the world safer for Black and brown bodies. And this is a time when we can raise our voices, go to the streets, and try to make impact as much as we can. And then, of course, after impact is keeping the momentum going. But for now, I'd like to just talk about how to help as an herbalist or somebody who uses herbal medicines at street protests. And talking about making change, let me just show you this. So I live in New York State, and I voted today. And we had the primaries. I'm not going to talk about who I voted for, but also we have local elections going on today, and so I voted. So I mean, it's so obvious. Everybody should vote. Everybody who can vote should vote, and everybody who can help make voting rights more prominent for people who cannot vote should help do that so everybody gets to vote. And then, of course, voting is not the answer to all of our problems or even a big part of our problems, but voting is a small part of how we can make change and make this world a safer place for people. So today's class is going to be is going to be specific. It's going to be just me this time. So sorry about that. In the future, I'll have other guests. While I'm saying that, if you're a BIPOC person out there and you want to be a part of this, please contact me. I would really appreciate having other voices. I'd like to make this more culturally diverse. And so if you feel comfortable getting in contact with me, please do. And then we can set it up so you can speak your truth about the protests. And so I look forward to hearing from people for that. So there'll be other people as there were last time here. Just so you know, my ethnicity, so I'm a Russian Jew. Mostly grandparents came to the United States after fleeing Russia. And so that's who I am, ethnicity, and that's probably all you need to know. And also just to say, if you're interested in herbal school, so I'm not really trolling for students here, but if I run an herb school, the Northeast School of Botanical Medicine. So if you're looking for snarky, sarcastic, politically edged herbal medicine with a very strong focus in plant identification, and a very strong focus in herbal first aid, my school will be one. You can read about it. You can call me up. We can talk about it. The program is filled for this year. There's only one small program this year, and that's online so far. But next year, hopefully, that the program is live again here in Ithaca, New York. That's where I live. And there's also a class that's 3 days a week and lots of field trips, but you have to move to Ithaca for that. But it's lovely here. Ithaca, New York is one of my favorite places, which is pretty easy to say since I've lived here over 30 years now. So what I'd like to do, so when you see me looking over here, I have my notes are over here, and I'm looking at you over here. What I'd like to just say is that this is the third part of this series, and I'd like to tell you, if you're interested in looking at any of the others, some of the other things considered. So here's what I'm trying to say, that this class builds on the previous 2 classes. So I'm not going to, if you're sending me questions about things that I've covered previously, I would just say, please look at them. There's been 4 hours of classes previous to this and cover a lot of the basics. So today, the goal is specific herbs and some preparations. And then I've talked previously about these things. I've talked about medics getting arrested, being filmed, whether you work in a clinic or you're roving herbalist, infiltrators who disrupt, besides just white supremacists, causing havoc, often just in the street protest movement. Sometimes people weasel their way in just to figure out who we are, make it harder for our lives. Maybe more pertinent today, for today's class, I've already covered different kinds of herbal preparations and how they're better or worse: tinctures, salves, teas, liniments. So when I talk about those today, those have all been covered in detail in the first class. And so if you're interested, like what a tincture is or a liniment is, or at least what I think one is, then I would suggest please go into those classes. Now we've covered a few herbs. So what I want to do now is I want to show you my first aid bag, and I want so that you have a sense of what a first aid bag could look like. So this is way more than most people need. It's definitely an herbalist's first aid bag. And so I'm not, what am I trying to say? I'm not expecting people to go out and have one of these bags made. So this is not an off-the-shelf bag. This is a bag that I spent a lot of money on, and I will spend a lot of money again. My bag is falling apart. If you are listening to this now or in the future, and you have the skills to build me a new first aid bag, I will pay very handsomely for it. I desperately need a new one. This one has been breaking apart. It's over 20 years old, as you'll see, but it's worked well. I have all the diagrams on how to make a first aid bag, how this first aid bag was made on my website, 7song.com. Just type in first aid bag, go to the blog. And I wrote, so you can also make it from yourself from that if you don't want to do it here. But if you're interested, it has to be, it's got to be like the real thing. It can't, it can't just be some hempy thing that looks good and falls apart. It's got to be a really strong, durable first aid bag. Here we go. So I'm going to get the bag, bring it over here and show it to you. And I'm going to show you some of the contents of the bag. I prepared this bag for a protest here in Ithaca, New York. While the protests here are powerful, but also small, and they haven't been violent. So I haven't had to bring as much stuff as I would if there was going to be more violence at a protest. So I was prepared, but if I was going to New York City, I would probably have a very different setup. We're just a larger city than Ithaca, New York. So this is the bag. This is the front. This is the back. So it's set up like a backpack, but it's not really just another backpack. It's an altered backpack. So what I want to do is go through the different compartments again. When I say I'll pay well, I mean, I'll pay whatever you think it's worth for someone to make me a really good bag. So it's going to be a bunch of moving the camera around. I apologize, but here it is. So the first pocket is this front pocket. In this front pocket, I have bandanas so I can wear them, classic bandana style, on my face. But they're not the best at getting gas out. I mean, it helps cover your identity. And it does help getting some smoke, some tear gas away, but you might want to have another mask under it. I have goggles. These are pretty effective goggles because they have these foam rims in them. They're also very steampunk, a genre of science fiction that I like a lot. But these are pretty good. I mean, they're not perfectly effective for keeping gases out. And you know, everything else is open, but at least my eyes are protected. These are kind of expensive. I think they were like $35. I forgot how much it paid. It's been years. Lots of gloves, because you're gonna need, I have lots more gloves inside, but then I just have gloves in here as well. Everything's delineated in smaller bags, so it's easier to get stuff. This is a checklist. The checklist is so I know exactly what I have. This is something that I have online. You can use it and just change it for yourself. So for instance, these are the herbs that I have. You can see the checks, what size I have. And then the back, the supplies. If you go to my website and you type in first aid checklist or look in the handouts, you could take this, you can run with it. I mean, it does, you know, you can make it whatever it is that makes it useful for you. But this is so I know what I have. This is more important at bigger events. I always have a headlamp. You should always have a flashlight, and I would suggest a headlamp in any first aid kit. Accidents happen all the time at night, and the ability to be able to see is very important. So, sorry about putting that in your face. There's that. So put these back and go to the next compartment. I'm not going to go over every tincture here, so don't worry about that. That would take a very long time, but I will go over tinctures today. The next pockets are these pockets, these zipper pockets. The zipper pockets have, this is called Medipore. Medipore is a kind of tape that sticks much better on skin, Medipore. It's more expensive, but also it works like if you get a cut on your butt. If you ever tried to tape a gauze on people's butts, it's very difficult because the tissue, the muscle moves, connective tissue moves, but also it just holds it better and it's breathable tape. So I'm a big fan of the Medipore. These are vet wraps. I think I have an open one. Vet wrap is like ACE wrap or sports wrap, but you use vet wrap to keep bandages on, not to stabilize an injury. So vet wrap, there's lots of names for vet wrap. One, VET, Vetwrap, VETWRAP. This is a gauze roll. I mean, most of these things are very obvious. Sports bandages for sprains and strains. Lots of different kinds of Band-Aids, including steri strips. If you need something that kind of needs to be stitched up but doesn't quite need to be stitched up, it's called steri strips. Lots of different Band-Aids. Clean cloths to wipe wounds off, throw out afterwards. More Band-Aids for cuts, of course. More vet wrap. I go through a lot of this stuff. That's mostly it in here. There could be lots more stuff. I also have another bag that I carry that has wound care. This is just one bag. So then I'm going to point out that the next thing, this is how I keep my, it's pretty sloppy right now. This is how I keep my tinctures. So this is the part of the first aid bag that works really well because of this transparent strip of plastic. I can see the names of the tinctures here. So because often in first aid, you're grabbing stuff pretty fast and putting it away pretty fast. So expediency is important. And so this is the part, like if people make me a bag, like I have new ideas and also different sizes that I want, but this is the part that really makes it an herbal first aid bag. It's a place, these are 1 ounce bottles for tinctures. You'll see more of it too. This is a section, just doesn't have any bottles now. These are some get to things quick. These are to-go bottles, and I'll talk more about them, but this is, I can put a little bit of medicine and refill it, fill it with water. Again, I'll talk more about it later. And fill it more with water so that people can take their medicines with them, right? Because if somebody's in pain, it's not a one-shot deal, right? If you're gonna give them a pain remedy, they can take it, maybe reduce the pain a little bit, but in another 20 minutes, the pain will be back. Or if they have asthma and you're helping their breathing. So you need to-go bottles. These are about 13 cents each with the cap. They're the cheapest I can find it. I'll look at, if people send chats, I'll look at them later, but that's what these are, to-go bottles. And this is a little similar and different. These are small cups. Herbal medicine tastes terrible. I'm gonna talk about tinctures in a bit, but that way I can put the medicine, they're plastic cups, and then I can fill it with water so people can shoot it down. So this is, I'm not gonna be doing this if it's a lot of ruckus going on. If I'm in the middle of a protest and it's violent around me, anybody who's hurt, we're going to try to get them out as fast as possible, because if there are people stampeding around and police coming in, more harm is on its way. So I want to say that some of these things are on the side, which is where street medic is until they're needed in the middle. And then hopefully if the person is movable, to move them away from danger. And then you can give them this. The nice thing about these is you just also put water in them so they can drink water, and because people are dehydrated all the time at these events. Lots of face masks. More gloves. We're getting there. So this section right here is more zippers. I'll go through some of these. This section right here is more tinctures. Notice that a lot of these down here are much larger bottles. This is what I would do in a new bag. I would have many more large bottles. But these are mostly tinctures, vinegars, and oils. And this right here, I'll show you what the medicines are in here. These are scalpels. So I carry scalpels to open abscesses that need to be drained. But you know, I mean, if you're going to use scalpels, you have to be experienced with using scalpels. They're also very dangerous items. They're very, very sharp, right? They're disposable scalpels. Markers to write anything on people's bodies. I could write instructions on how to take something on their body or put it on a label and put it on their medicine. Q-tips to clean out. This should probably, I wouldn't probably bring this to a protest, but these are disposable razors. If people get cut, let's say somebody gets glass shards in them and they cut, and you have to wrap a cut up and it's in their leg and it's hairy, you can't put gauze easily on hair. So the disposable razors are to shave around the cut to get it cleaner, also so the hairs don't go in the wound. That's more of a first aid thing. Super glue to close cuts. You probably wouldn't need there. I just make sure I always have this on me. This is a tick removal tool, right? So out here, it would be possible somebody would have a tick. If it's more urban, less likely, then a small flashlight. That's a little thing in there, a small flashlight. And that's the tick removal tool. Bandage scissors, sharp tweezers to pull stuff out. And they're inside a piece of cork. I hope this is useful. And keep going. This is very similar to anybody's run bag, frankly. If you're working with EMTs, they have a lot of this. I'll show you what their kind of run bag is. The bag that you wear when you go to a protest or to any emergency medical situation. In this compartment, this is a burn cream. So if somebody picks up a hot projectile, this is my favorite burn cream. It has 2 or 3% lidocaine and it has aloe. It just works really nicely and it's called alocaine. It's a little bit expensive, but I think one of the best burn remedies to reduce the pain. We'll talk about this later. This is Yunnan Payao. It's a hemostat. It helps stop bleeding. It's a Chinese patent product. So you could buy it online, Yunnan Payao. Or you could go to, if you live near a Chinatown in New York City or anywhere Chinatown is, often they're inexpensive. This is a medicated honey to put on burns. I have a bunch of salves. Clove essential oil for toothaches. When people get stressed, people have tendency to toothaches when they get stressed, they get toothaches. To go with toothaches, so clove essential oil, aspirin, ibuprofen, so fever reducers, pain reducers. I see there's chats coming on. I'll try to get them in a little bit. Lavender essential oil also for burns. And sometimes it smells really nice if somebody's just in a panic state. So that's mostly my first aid bag for now. Let me put this away and then come back. And we'll talk mostly about herbs today, but I wanted to show you a classic first aid bag, classic meaning the only one I know. A few other things. I always carry red tape. Red tape is what identifies you as a street medic. Of course, anybody can buy red tape and put them on them. So it's not anybody with red tape, but street medics tend to have crosses on them, red crosses on them. Usually, like I wear a baseball hat and have it on the rim of my baseball hat to make it obvious. I often have it on my shoulders, but it's sometimes not easy to see. On my back, it's on my first aid bag. So just red duct tape. This is a more traditional run bag. They're a little more expensive. Oh, actually, compared to that, these are really cheap. But it just has lots of pockets. But it's not that great for tinctures because all the tinctures, there's no real way you can, all right, sorry. You can put the tinctures, you can take a cloth and you can have a cloth that's open and you can put small pockets in the cloth and put the tinctures in there, label it and unroll them. It just takes more time. So, but that's definitely a possibility. And then you would have them and they'd be semi-organized. So you might have like A through C in this cloth with these little pockets sewn into it, and then just know your order and pull them out. And then you can have that, and then the whole thing would just kind of be tied tight in there. But I do carry this. This is my wound kit. So it has a lot of the wound supplies that I bring to protests. Sometimes it sits in my car. If my car is there, which it's often not. So let me see if I can answer any of these questions that are coming in. And all the recordings will be, all these will be recorded. Never mind, that was already done. I'm sorry, I'm being repetitious here. I'm still trying to get into the swing of the whole online class thing. I've been teaching for 30 years and running a school, but I've been used to doing it in person, which means that I'm not looking at myself when I do it. I'm looking at people, other people, which is nice. So here we go. Ready? We're going to move into the second part, which is basically talking about different herbal remedies and how to take them. So what I want to do is I want to separate the dosaging for remedies so that I can give it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stage it at saying something like, you can use this herb at a low dose, a medium dose, or a high dose. And so what I'm going to do now is explain what I mean by this. This is nobody's formal agreement. This is just how I do it. Excuse me, I'll get some tea. So, in other words, if you look it up, it won't make sense to anybody else. And so, let's go there. So there's kind of 5 elements or 5 ways that I separate dosages. So first I'm going to go with low, medium, and large dose. So a low dose to me means about 5 drops to about a half a dropper full. So just to point it out, this will take a few moments, just to point it out. So this is a 1 ounce dropper. This is a 2 ounce dropper. In fact, they hold almost the same amount of liquid. And the reason that is because the 2 ounce dropper is thinner. So I'm just going to tell you the numbers in case you're interested. When this is filled to the very brim, and you can't see any, it's filled with fluid, that's 2 milliliters, pretty close to 2 milliliters of fluid. This is 1 ounce. So that means it's 30 milliliters. So that basically means you have 15 full dropperfuls to use out of this. The problem with dropperfuls is that they're very inconsistent. For instance, this chaparral is thicker and might not fill as much because of the viscosity or thickness of the fluid. Also, depending on how stable your rubber top is, it's a whole conversation itself, will depend how much comes out. So in this class, I am going to use dropperfuls, but in general, I like to use milliliters because it's more specific. So I'm going to describe that a little bit more and move forward with this part of the class. So this is 2 milliliters, it's filled to the top. But what I tend to mean, so like usually what you can do is if you squeeze, like double squeeze, you can get often about half a dropperful. So it's about half a dropperful. So a low dosage to me, it's a little bit more. A low dosage to me would be like this much, down to like this much. None of the plants in this class are toxic. I do use some toxic herbs, meaning if you took a bunch, you can get very sick or very ill and die. But those are not herbs I'm going to discuss in a class like this. Those are called low dose herbs or toxic herbs. Excuse me, those are called, by mistake, I'm going to take that, I can't really take it back, I'm being recorded. But what I meant by that is that those are often called drop dosages. So when people say these herbs are drop dosages, often then they mean that the herb has toxicity not at a medium to large amount. Low dose just means smaller amounts help. I'll move right there. So again, in this class, what I'm be talking about is low dose, which is about this or less. Medium dose, which is this to this being full. So medium dose is like a half a dropper full to 1 dropper full. And then a large dose is usually 1 to 2 dropperfuls. This thing full to the top and another one filled to the top. So it really just varies though. So basically here's how it kind of looks. When you use low dosage herbs, usually you give somewhere like about 10 drops at a time, close to half a dropper full. And then you just keep giving that amount until you get the result that you're looking for. So I'm going to give an example right now. So let's say you're working with somebody, it's a street protest, somebody's under a lot of stress and they move into an asthma attack. They don't have albuterol, it's not scary. Their lips are not turning blue, so they're wheezing, but they can talk, which means they can breathe. So I'm using this as an example to talk about how to dosage your plants, especially low dose. So one of the herbs that we'll talk about for difficulty breathing due to tightness due to asthma is a plant called Lobelia. Lobelia is a low dosage plant. It's not a poisonous plant, it's a low dosage plant. So small amounts often make a change. So I want to talk about it and then we're going to go to something called a plateau dose. So if somebody comes to me and they have asthma, I've asked them some questions that we'll get to in a minute. And then I might do something like give them a pretty small amount, like about 10 drops. So let me say the most obvious thing. Never, ever, 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 ever give tinctures to people without letting them know it has alcohol in it. So every class I say this, and I'm repeating it all the time. Don't give tinctures to people who don't know that there's alcohol in it. And the word tincture does not mean this has alcohol in it to the vast majority of people I interact with. The word tincture actually means almost nothing. So if somebody's having asthma, I'll say I have this remedy that might help you. It's called Lobelia. It has alcohol in it. Is that okay? So please take this to heart, right? And then if they say, well, actually, I'm sober, then I'll say, okay, let's see what else we have. Lobelia, I also have in vinegar form, for instance, which doesn't set off somebody drinking. Also, many people with religious, with different religions, particularly if they're Muslim, don't take alcohol at all. And I want to respect their faith. And so I'm going to tell them it has alcohol in it as well. So everybody's different about how much, because you could be somebody who doesn't drink much, but drinks a little bit. And then you could be somebody that has to be stone cold sober, or you're going to go on a bender. So just once again, let everybody know that it has alcohol. Just say this has alcohol. Don't put it in hot water. Also, you don't have hot water, right? But don't put it in hot water. That's a myth. I'm not going to move into it at this point. I'm going to keep going with this description. So somebody comes in with asthma, and I ask them if the alcohol is okay. They're like, it's fine. And then I give them a small amount like this. I put it directly in their mouth. Let me see what this is before I put it in. For Dallas. I put it directly in the mouth if that's acceptable. If I can put it in water, I will. Then they drink it down. Then I'm going to wait about 2 or 3 minutes. Lobelia, as many low-dose plants are, act pretty fast, usually within 2 to 3 minutes. So, you know, like something like 120 to 180 seconds. So what I'm going to do is give them like this amount. And about 2 minutes later, I'm going to ask them, how do you feel? They might do something like this. Maybe a little bit of wheezing, but less wheezing if it worked. They don't always work. If it worked, they say, oh, I'm breathing a little better. Then I'll say, oh, you want a little more. So then I'm going to give them another about the same amount directly in their mouth or in water. It's usually directly in their mouth, the lobelia. Directly in their mouth, and then ask them how they're feeling. And then they might say, a little bit better, a little bit better. And so this is when it's working positively. And then I might give them one more dosage or another dosage, not one more, but another dosage. And they'll say, it's made no difference at all. So I stop giving it to them. So this is what I call the plateau dose. So with low dose plants, they're often strong and small amounts work. And I give them until there's no more positive result. I'm not looking for a negative result. I'm not saying, oh, that's, you know, I feel terrible. Hopefully that's not going to happen. It's been positive until it doesn't do anything, and then I just stop it. So that's what I call the plateau dose. And that's what I usually use with low dose herbs and occasionally for low to medium dose herbs, as I'll get to. So that's pretty much it. So a medium dose is somewhere like a half dropper full to 1 dropper full, maybe 1.5 dropper fulls. Medium dose plants are pretty safe. And then the large dose plants are just very safe. So something like echinacea, you can give very large amounts, meadowsweet, chamomile. There's lots of plants that you can give very large amounts of, and so I do. I think that's it for that. I'm going to check the one question here and see it. So I'm going to talk. So the question is, will lobelia work as a glyceride? And Judy, I've never used it as a glyceride, but it works as a vinegar. I actually made a bunch of lobelia glycerin this year, but I haven't tried it yet. So I'm not sure how effective it is. So I hope that made sense. There's one more dosage to cover. So we have plateau dose. That's when the herb has reached the maximum effectiveness. We have a low dose, which is a couple of drops to half a dropper full. Medium dose, which is a half a dropper full to a dropper and a half. And then a large dose, a dropper full to 2 dropper fulls to 3 dropper fulls. Basically, they're very safe herbs for most people. And then the last dosage is what's called a loading dose. The loading dose I do more in first aid. That's not protests, but when somebody has an infection, often the first dose I give them could be very high. It could be like 2 to 3 dropper fulls. And the goal of a loading dose is to start recoveries, to like hit their body strong with the herbs to stop, maybe reduce pain considerably, or to start killing infectious agents. So there's also something called a loading dose, but it won't be discussed as much here. That's more of a technical term that's used regularly in regular medicine too, meaning pharmaceutical, whatever regular medicine is. As if herbal medicine, I feel bad like making fun of it, like as if herbal medicine is not like the oldest form of internal medicine. So I'm going to move to some plants and discuss them. We covered a few at the last class, and we're going to start with Calamus. And here we are. Say ready? How you feeling? Throw it in the chat box. How you doing? Are you awake? Is this interesting? Come on, throw me some chats here, folks. You're welcome not to, of course. But it is nice when it's interactive. I mean, the worst part of doing stuff online for me, besides having to look at my face all the time, is I miss people. Like I live alone. I love living alone. And when I'm around people, and often the herbal people I meet are just interesting. They're just interesting. And so being online means I'm not meeting new people. I'm just like revealing myself to the world. So, all right. So somebody's concerned about the dosage, probably pretty reasonable. Yeah, so Vicky has a really good point. So Vicky, putting things direct. So thank you, Vicky. Actually, I need to address that, and your thought is extremely well taken. Even though these have alcohol in them, if I put these directly and germs go in there, and I reuse this. So if the one thing you can do is alcohol kills viruses pretty well, so you can shake it up, but still it would be better. So I want to just really put a shout out to Vicky and thank you for saying this. At this point, with viruses around so prevalently, the COVID virus, not just any virus, because who knows, maybe it gets on the top here. So I'm wearing gloves when I do this, and I'll throw out the gloves in between. So you would have to be safe, and actually putting any kind of dropper near somebody's mouth absolutely increases risk of COVID. If that happens, one thing you can do is you can shake it and then get an alcohol wipe, or get your bottle of sanitizer, throw it on your hands and wipe your whole thing down. So it's better, but still better to not put anything near somebody's mouth. One more thank you for Vicky for pointing that out. I sometimes get stuck in old mind frames and need to break out to what's happening now. Let me see if there's any other questions. I want to say that it doesn't really matter whether it goes under your tongue or on top of your tongue. There are so many blood vessels in your mouth that you're just going to absorb. What do you think about the glasses look, Eliza? So I'm just talking to a former student out there. So we're going to talk about Calamus. This odd-looking flower is the inflorescence or flower structure of Calamus. I picked it today. I grow it in my pond. Pretty interesting looking. Now I'm going to scratch it. Everybody, get your nose up to here and see if you can smell that. Breathe it in. If you can smell it, I'm not sure what you're on. Much better smelling than hand sanitizer. So what I'm going to do is, in this class, I'm not going to talk about how to make medicines, all the different species. I'm not going to do the whole wildcrafting medicine making part of this, because I'll get through 4 plants in this class. What I want to do is cover a bunch of plants. And so what I'll talk about is their basic uses, doses, preparation forms, and some best ways to use them at protests. Are you with me? All right, so here we go. This thing's a little bit, I think I'll leave it on. It's not my favorite colors of I voted things. So if you have voted, if you voted today or voted recently, put it in the chat. Say, I voted, glad to have voted recently, especially you New Yorkers who need to vote. Everybody needs to vote. And then everybody has to do other things as well. Or if you want, you can maybe, I don't really know how you would do that. All right, Lou Velvet voted. So it's easy to not vote right now because it seems unimportant, because it looks like, you know, the presumptive front runner of the Democratic primary. But still, voting matters. Also, it's just getting there. It was so low voting. When I went this morning, there was like almost nobody at the building where I vote. And I was just thinking, like, am I wrong? You know, because I checked it in the morning just to make sure. But basically, it was just the people who were registering people there were the only people besides me to vote who were there. Also, there's no Republican candidates for primary. So the herb, sorry for all that digression, the herb is Calamus. And so mostly, so Calamus is very strong tasting. So it's not particularly toxic, But if you give people a lot of it, whether it's in water or directly in their mouth, often, even though it smells interesting and some people like the flavor, it's a very strong flavor. I would say that Calamus is a low to medium dose plant when you're giving it to people for the reasons I'm going to suggest. Calamus does a lot, but there's a couple of things at protests that I specifically like it for. So the preparations of Calamus are tincture, glycerite. Those are the two main ones at a protest, really, and tea. But tea is going to be in the clinic, not something you're running around with. So tincture and glycerite are two really excellent forms of Calamus. My favorite reason to use it is to increase focus. So it's pretty specific and it's odd. So I don't know why or how it does it, but I can tell you, being a teacher to adult students, that focus is not always the strongest thing in the herbal classroom. And so I pretty much always have a bottle handy for students. So here's what would happen. So let's say you're working with another street medic or somebody trying to organize, and there's like you're at a protest, right? So there's a lot of input happening at a protest, right? There's noise over here. You might be wearing an earpiece, so you're dealing with communications or what's called comms. I talked about comms in the previous class. And it's just a high stress thing. I mean, sometimes there's low stress at these things, but let's say you're at, it's kind of high stress. For many people, their thoughts just get scattered and it's hard for them to focus. So Calamus by itself might not do much, right? Maybe taking a couple of deep breaths, talking to a friend, getting out of the scenario for a few seconds or minutes. But Calamus can help. So I find Calamus, so there's a couple of ways that it's hard to organize thoughts. One of them is when you have too many competing thoughts. That's not when I use Calamus. That's, just to mention two other plants, too many competing thoughts is more of a passion flower or blue vervain for that. Calamus, I find better when it's scattered thoughts. So all of a sudden, all this input happens and you just kind of go blank. Like, what am I going to do? It's not like all these competing thoughts of what I should do. And so usually about a half a dropper full as often as needed. So again, pretty safe, but it's really useful and it's pretty unusual, right, to do that. I mean, maybe it's just a weird flavor. You're like, oh, what is that? And just, ooh, your mind comes back into focus, like the reset button pressed. But I really like it for that, and I really suggest it. I think the tincture is a little better because I do think the harsh flavor kind of kicks the body into gear, but the glycerite works as well, but just I think not as well. Works, but not as well. So that's Calamus, and that's how I use it at protests. The one other thing you can use Calamus for at protests is if you have a stagnant belly issue going on. So we're to talk a lot about digestion. One thing, so like a quick protest, like you leave your house and you go to your protest for a few hours and you come home. So that's one kind of protest. In those kind of things, some of these scenarios don't happen. When you go to a protest and you might be there for 2 or 3 days, living in a place that you're not used to being in, one thing that often goes awry is digestive system. So especially if you're used to the foods that you eat, you have a limited diet range, and then you go to a protest and you don't have you eat what's available. Or you're just at a protest and it's just a few hours and you're really hungry and somebody has some granola bar, but eating that causes a lot of gas in you. But you're hungry enough, and of course you eat it because you need some energy. Calamus is also good for kind of breaking up when you feel you have stagnation in your GI tract. So in your gut, in your stomach, your intestines. So it's not so much for constipation. In fact, it doesn't really help constipation, but more like, have you ever eaten food and it just feels like, it just sits there? And it feels like I just want to get it kind of moving. That's one of the times you can use Calamus for that. Again, same dosage, about a half a dropper full. There are other herbs that are much nicer tasting that you can use, but it's just an idea for this. Every herb that I cover in here, there's lots more to say about it. And so there's lots more to read about it. And hopefully there's herbalists to talk to about it. So let's see if there's any questions about Calamus. And then we'll go on from there. All right. Thank you for voting, everybody. I'm not sure when this will be recorded. So I don't know if you can see the picture of Michelle up there. That's Michelle Marlowe. Michelle Marlowe has been instrumental. It's a very tech word. for helping me do these. So if you appreciate any of the classes I give, definitely tell Michelle, write her a letter, send her chocolates, send her ice cubes. She's in Oklahoma. But I just want to really thank Michelle. She's been amazing. For me, she's been, not only this, she's been a hand holder. All right, Wendy asks, what other plants mentioned? This will be put up later, Wendy, to read. Next herb, here we go. Next herb is echinacea. So it's got to be the most popular herb. So why would we bring echinacea to a protest? I would bring echinacea to a protest in order to increase adaptive and innate immunity. And so I'm going to explain that right now. But the first thing I want to say is, for some people with autoimmune conditions, it's not common, but it's not rare. Sometimes echinacea seems to increase, or it increases their autoimmune problems. So if it's lupus, it might get more rashy, or rheumatoid arthritis might get more stiff. My experience, having given it to lots of people, is not common, but you should let people know that that's a possibility. So what I would suggest is, for somebody who just gets sick easy, right? So we have the elephant in the room, right? So we have COVID-19 exists at every protest happening everywhere in the world right now. COVID, I'm just gonna call it COVID. COVID exists everywhere, right? So meaning, there's places where it's not, but it could be anywhere, and it is everywhere. So you're gonna have to minimize your exposure to COVID at protests. So at no point am I really saying any of these herbs are gonna stop COVID-19. I know that they can reduce the symptoms. Liza, who's written on here, has helped her partner with symptoms of COVID-19. I've worked with some people, but I am not saying in any way that when I say it helps people from getting sick, I'm not really talking about COVID-19. I'm talking about your average colds and flus that most people survive okay through. So I hope that's really straightforward. You'd have to protect yourself at these. I wear a mask the whole time, and I also wear gloves when I go to a protest at this point. And I wear long sleeves. I mean, I'm hot if it's during the day or at night. So I'm back to echinacea. Echinacea, by the way, is a medium to large dose plant. Small amounts don't seem to do that much. And so here's what I would suggest. If you're somebody that goes to a protest and you get sick pretty easily, like you get colds or flus whenever you're around people, all of a sudden you get snotty, you're just somebody who takes on what's ever around them, GI bugs, I would carry echinacea on you. So this is less about the medic, or ask a medic for some, and just take, maybe one dropper full every 3 to 4 hours. I think that would be the better way to go. So instead of just doing one large dose, just kind of stimulating your immunity throughout the day. And then, so I would suggest this. If you're somebody that when you're in crowds of people, you get sick easily, I would suggest that you take 1 or 2 days before, let's say 2 days before, start taking one dropper full, right? Like half a dropper full to one dropper full 3 times a day. Before 2 days before you go, 1 day before you go, and then when you go, start taking one full dropper 3 times a day. So I'm gonna repeat that and try to make it make sense. So 2 days before, half a dropper, maybe twice a day. 1 day before, half a dropper, maybe twice a day. When you're there, one full dropper, maybe 3 times a day while at the protest. And then when you get back home, maybe one more day, one full dropper 3 times a day, and then reduce it. In other words, you want to keep stimulating your immune system. I don't want to get into the issue of, does echinacea lose its efficiency if you keep taking it? The answer is no. It just depends on who you are. It doesn't always work, but that's it. If you're a herbalist at something like this, and somebody presents with a cold or a flu and symptoms, I would give them echinacea. And what I probably would do is take one of these bottles, and this goes with, I think it was Vicky, I made that excellent point, because now it's in their hands. You would put like this much echinacea, maybe a third, fill the rest with water, and then they take a half a capful, which is about 1.5 mils. They take half a capful every couple hours. So that's another way of giving them an echinacea. It's not very strong; they're not getting that much, but at least they're getting some continuously. If you have a large amount, then you can give them more. The other use of echinacea is if somebody gets a wound, let's say they get a rubber bullet wound, or they fall on pavement and cut themselves, or they get shards of glass, and their wounds are healing very slowly, actually taking echinacea internally is a really good idea. So let's say somebody falls and gets some glass, you get the glass out of their arm, they have a couple pieces of glass in here. It's not terrible, they're not spurting blood or anything dangerous. And they also say something like, I tend to heal, my wounds heal slowly. You can actually do an echinacea wash, but I don't usually carry enough for that. So I'd probably give them the bottle and have them take it throughout the day. Echinacea stimulates innate immunity. Innate immunity is the kind of immunity that's really helpful for external wounds. So that's echinacea. Any questions on echinacea before I move on? About stuff that I covered as opposed to stuff I didn't cover? I definitely prefer Echinacea purpurea. Echinacea purpurea is just the most commonly grown one. People are not wildcrafting, and never buy wildcrafted echinacea. Don't buy any wildcrafted echinacea. And purpurea is just the easiest one to grow for most people. So that's the one I like. Maybe it's not the strongest, but it's the most prolific, and so that's good enough. I basically just use the roots of echinacea. So that's what I recommend. I tincture the fresh roots. I buy them, so I'm going to plug a friend's herb grow, a place where they grow herbs, herb garden, that's what they're called. So I buy echinacea from Black Locust Gardens in Ann Arbor, Michigan. But here's really what I would say. You should buy echinacea roots from anybody local if possible and fresh. So the Black Locust Garden, Alex is a former student of mine. I like supporting her, and that's why I'm saying it. But really even better is just finding who's your local, maybe it's Healing Spirits in Avoca, New York. And support your herb growers. It's a lot of work for not a lot of money. So support your local farmers, support your local herb growers. And then as far as what I said about what kind of echinacea immunity, I did say that echinacea supports both adaptive and innate immunity. And I stick with that because that's where the science is. Next herb is elecampane. Elecampane is specific for this time in history because it's a respiratory anti-inflammatory. So COVID-19 causes difficulty in breathing, not from bronchoconstriction, but from bronchoinflammation, really the same fest, bronchoinflammation. So things that open you up like albuterol or lobelia don't help at all for COVID. In fact, there's potential worsening. We'll talk about that later. What you're really trying to do is you want to reduce inflammation. So if people have good asthma due to respiratory inflammation at a protest, elecampane could be useful. You would take it beforehand. So if you're the person who takes Pulmicort and it's helpful, but you still get some respiratory inflammation in crowds, you might, as an adjunct to it, meaning your steroid inhalers, as an adjunct, you might add an herb like elecampane into it. So I don't really use elecampane that much at the protest for somebody getting gas because it doesn't help. But I'm just mentioning it because I think elecampane is an important herb and historically to know right now because it's one of the herbs that can help with somebody who has COVID. That's not terrible. They're not hospitalized, but they have respiratory tightness. So I think that's it. I don't really want to cover elecampane so much. It's the root of the plant that's used though. And then you can use it in tincture form. I haven't described the different forms. So, but for that one is tincture form. The next plant is eyebright. So eyebright is the genus Euphrasia, which means to make happy. Eu is good, Phrasia is happy. So eyebright is a pretty commonly sold plant for lots of reasons, but the reason that you're going to bring eyebright to a protest is for people who are having allergic reactions. So eyebright has antihistamine-like properties. So Benadryl has antihistamine-like properties, but makes people sleepy, which could be very useful. Eyebright is not as strong as Benadryl. I would say not close, maybe a fifth as strong as Benadryl. But for some people, it works pretty well and doesn't have any of the tendency to make people sleepy. So the reason that I would use eyebright is if I'm at a protest and then somebody has allergies, and they're common at protests. Stress brings on allergies, going from like cold to warm. So if you go into if you're hot outside and go into an air-conditioned building and come back out again, that can bring it on. Dust can bring it on. Food can bring on allergies. So you have plenty of allergy triggers at a protest. Often people don't notice them initially when there's a lot of action going on, because your adrenaline is kicked in and it's overriding your allergic reaction, or at least your feeling of the allergic reaction. But afterwards, then you're like, oh, my eyes are watering, my nose is stuffy, I feel fatigued and just out of it from your allergies. And then I would use eyebright. Eyebright is a medium to large, use medium to large amounts. So something like a half a dropper full to a dropper full, and then you just keep giving it until you reach the plateau dose. It's a very safe herb. I've never seen a bad effect, but I'm sure it'll happen one point or another if I keep using it. And so I'm a big fan of it. Again, I mean, you can carry drugs. You can carry antihistamines. You can carry many medications, and a lot of them are over the counter and absolutely legal to have and give to people. But eyebright is an herbal antihistamine. So that's the one I carry for that. The next herb is fire cider. So first, I really put fire cider here. I mean, I don't think anybody who I'm going to give somebody I'm going to give a big thank you to. So if you didn't know this, so this is a bit of politic. So fire cider, there's a company trying to steal the fire cider name and make it unavailable for herbalists to use. And a couple of herbalists and Rosemary Gladstar, who's also an herbalist, put their time and money on the line and fought to have that, and it was overturned. So fire cider is now a name in the public domain. I want to name those people personally because they're friends, and I think they did amazing work, and I hardly ever get to congratulate them on changing a big thing for us in the world. And that's Mary Blue, Nicole Telks, and Catherine Langelier. I haven't never said Catherine's last name. So again, and Rosemary Gladstar. All of you, like, you kicked butt, and you did something that could have just started a whole downhill segment of herbalists not being able to use different names. And so thank you, thank you, thank you for your time, for your patience, and for the money you put in for legal fees. All right, so why do you bring fire cider to a protest? There's two reasons. One of them is it's pretty stimulating. So what is fire cider? So basically fire cider is in vinegar. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going back to eyebright. Eyebright I usually use in tincture form. I made some glycerite, so I'm on eyebright again. I'm sorry, I constantly do this. I've made some eyebright and glycerin, but I don't know how strong it is. But the tincture is what I use generally for eyebright. Back to fire cider. For fire cider, it's always in vinegar, so that's what your base is. And then you just add things like horseradish, garlic, onions, ginger. Basically, if you thought, how can I make my breath the most dragony breath possible? This would be the way to do it. At the same time, being super spicy and delicious. There's lots of different remedies to make, recipes to make fire cider. I like, this is one of them. Often honey is added. So they're just like, if you like me and just like spicy stuff, it's delish. Plus, it's just stimulating without being caffeinated. Basically, just giving the body a lot of spice. So you're just kind of tired. You have, you get your small cup. Somebody pours some fire cider, and you shoot it down. And it wakes you back up, but no caffeine, which could be nice. And the other way that we use fire cider is, so this not happening now, but often I've gone to protests in Washington, D.C., when they inaugurate whichever president I dislike. And so we go to the inauguration, and D.C. in January 1st during the inauguration is very cold. And fire cider is pretty warming. So you could just do shots of fire cider to stay warm. You don't want to sweat too much, because if you sweat, then you cool off and the opposite effect happens. But those are the two main reasons I bring it. Also, I just wanted to talk about fire cider. I never do, and so it was my chance to do it. But those are good reasons to bring it. The thing, though, if you bring fire cider, there's nobody, like, this is like, 2 shots of fire cider, right? So you'd bring fire cider, you'd have like, you would have your dependable water bottle, which will probably never taste or smell the same again, and you fill it up, bring little cups, and you give people shots, letting them know that it's very spicy. right, so let's see what kind of questions we have and then move on. So what percentage of alcohol I use for tinctures just depends on what I'm tincturing. Rachel's question is, can you use it instead of an EpiPen? The answer is absolutely not. It's a great question, Rachel. I carry an EpiPen. I know they're stupidly expensive, and then if I don't use them, then they're just used. Anyway, I would just suggest to everybody to have an EpiPen, though you have to have a prescription for the EpiPen. So that one's a little bit tricky, and they're like, I don't know how much they are right now. I haven't bought one since they did the massive price increase on them. They used to be about 60 to 75 bucks each. So there's nothing for an allergic reaction that gets anaphylactic. I don't know anything but an EpiPen. The next thing is digestive pain. You might have digestive pain because you just drank way too much fire cider. And digestive pain. So I have a bunch of remedies for digestive pain because people just get upset stomachs in stressful situations. Again, often they don't feel the stress, the belly aches during the height of a protest, but later. And so I just bring things to help people's bellies relax. Usually you don't see so much diarrhea. And when I do first aid at wilderness events, diarrhea is common from pathogens being passed around, but not so much at protests. Also, people, if they have it, probably have it when they get back home. So digestive pain. So this is a formula. I'm going to give you a couple of herbs that you can put in a formula that can just ease like basic digestive pain because you just ate something that doesn't feel good. I'm going to have a number of these. So this one is pretty good for GI inflammation. Like if you're prone to celiac, well, if you have celiac and you're prone to inflammation, or really any inflammatory bowel disease like Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis. These are not answers to the long-term problems. These are just helpful for the moment. It doesn't really do much it wouldn't do anything for candida. It wouldn't help candida infections. So the herbs that I would recommend for this are meadowsweet, which is Filipendula ulmaria, wild yam. So wild yam should not be used if anybody is pregnant. In fact, if anybody's pregnant, they probably shouldn't take any herb without knowing what's in the herbs, what's in the formula. This is a tricky question, right? Because who are you going to ask who is pregnant, right? And so the way to do this is kind of ask everybody, right? That way, if they're like, well, I'm not going to be pregnant, you're like, sorry, just ask everybody because it's a safe and easy way to do it without insulting people and trying to genderize people at who would be pregnant and who wouldn't be pregnant. So one thing to do is just say, are you pregnant? To pretty much everybody. But I would avoid wild yam in pregnancy. It is used in pregnancy, but I wouldn't want to give it unless it was being used for pregnancy. So that's wild yam. That's Dioscorea villosa. Catnip, one of my favorite herbs for just belly aches. By the way, none of these herbs really kill anything. These herbs just reduce inflammation and pain. There are other herbs that we'll get to that actually can kill a pathogen in your GI tract, but they're not that common at these events. Most people have stomach pain, again, from food, water, and stress, and et cetera. And the last one is chamomile. So a nice formula for this is meadowsweet, wild yam, catnip, and chamomile. Everything would be 2 parts, except the wild yam would be 1 part. So 2 parts meadowsweet, 2 parts catnip, 2 parts chamomile, 1 part wild yam. There's lots of other things. There's so many other combinations. You throw fennel in there and ginger in there, but it's just a basic one. This is a medium to large dose medicine, this one. And it could be in tincture or glycerite. I don't know how good wild yam is in glycerite, but the other ones are good in glycerin. All right. So I have golden seal here. I'm going to talk about it for a minute, but actually I use almost 0 golden seal. The only golden seal I now currently use is what I have from the past. I haven't bought golden seal. I don't gather golden seal. And I suggest we just let golden seal become a plant again in the wild by leaving it alone. So that's my thoughts about it. So I'm going to go over it because people talk about it, but really I think there are other plants like, Japanese barberry. I think it works just about as well. In some places, I think Japanese barberry, which we'll get to maybe, works even better. I don't know if this happens to you, but when I talk to a computer, my voice gets really dry. It just is this odd, like, I don't know, I talk loud all the time. I'm like a loud talker. But when I talk to the computer, maybe the computer just like sucks the energy and sucks the moisture out of me. And there's a little fan, and all of it is going to some weird way to Jeff Bezos. And Jeff Bezos, even though he doesn't own a Mac, even though he's not the owner of Mac, then he takes that energy and he throws it through a 3D plasticizer and makes more money for himself. So I'm hoping that's not happening. Hopefully he doesn't suck my imagination out as well. So golden seal is, yeah, I have an hour to go and I'm already going to the goof zone. So golden seal, I would suggest low to large doses. Sometimes use a large loading dose for golden seal for infections, but also you can use low doses, so it's kind of all over the place for that. For the preparations for golden seal, tinctures, teas, capsules work good for golden seal, and glycerites are okay if you know how to, you have to get that berberine into the glycerin, and so that's a little bit tricky. If you buy them, probably it's done well. So golden seal is useful. It's just other plants are useful too. And what it's useful for is infections internally and externally. So here's what it looks like at a protest. Somebody comes to me and they have a cut anywhere in their body and there's pus, right? There's pus coming out of the cut. It's a pretty good sign that they might have an infection. They might have a minor staph infection. Not really sure. Also, if I put my mask on, I'm wearing a mask, look at a flashlight, look at the back of their throat, and there's an abscess, maybe the beginning of strep throat, but right now it's just an abscess, and maybe smell the breath, smells pretty putrid, so they have an infection in their throat, or really almost anywhere in their body. So again, there are other herbs that cover this, and I'm going to get to them when we get to them. But golden seal is useful for this. So if you have golden seal, use it up, and then we'll switch to Japanese barberry later on. But it's just, I would apply it externally. So somebody had an infection, I would apply it on. You could also use golden seal as a liniment. Go to previous classes to learn about liniments, but basically it's a plant in isopropyl alcohol rather than tincture. So it's an external agent. And you can put the golden seal as a liniment on top of the wound and wrap it up if it's infected, or if it looks like it's going to get infected, right? So somebody gets a bad cut, then they just sleeping someplace or they're steps away, no matter how well you wash it. And so you might want to throw some golden seal on there. Another herb we'll get to that you can combine with this would be propolis. Propolis is actually a tree resin. And you can add the golden seal and the propolis together and put that on, and it sticks better, it adheres better to the tissue. And then, possible wrap it up, put a gauze pad on that, and then tape maybe even vet wrap to hold it in place. So golden seal is good for internal and external infections, as is Japanese barberry, which we'll get to. And then there's many forms of golden seal and the other herbs that you can use. But plants that are rich in berberine, because that's what berberine is one of the strongest components, and berberine is found in many plants for infections in particular. Let me see if there's any questions. Yes, the electromagnetic fields. Or maybe they're just the magnetic fields. I haven't listened to any of their music in quite a while, I think. Does anybody know? They're a New York group. Like they've done like 100 million and 2,411 love songs, that album. The next herb is Gotu kola. Gotu kola is Centella asiatica. Gotu kola is Centella asiatica. Preparations for it include tinctures, teas, capsules, liniments, oils, and salves. So the reason there's so many is because the constituents of Gotu kola come out pretty easily in different fluids. Plus, it's really good as an external healing agent as well as an internal healing agent. So I'm going to speak about a few specific uses of Gotu kola in protest medicine. So there are two main reasons to use Gotu kola. One of them is about mental clarity, and the other is about connective tissue damage. Gotu kola also does other things. It works on the vasculature and strengthens vasculature, veins and arteries. But in this situation, I want to talk mainly about its use for mental clarity, probably something I could use, and for connective tissue restorer, which is really the primary thing for use in first aid in protests. So if you're somebody, it's a little bit like Calamus, but you take it for longer. If you're somebody that just gets foggy easily under stressful conditions, or you had an illness like Lyme, and since the illness, you've been foggier, or if you've had an injury and you're in a PTSD situation and your mind is just foggier than it used to be, meaning foggy tends to mean that your memory is not as well, your recall doesn't work as well. I mean, it's kind of a pretty good self-description of it, but it means that you have trouble bringing things up. It's just, you know, it's harder to find what you're looking for and then voice it or just think it. So if you're going to use Gotu kola for this, first you can easily combine it with things like Calamus and rosemary. Well done, Rachel. And ginkgo are some of the herbs to combine it. Again, Calamus, rosemary, and ginkgo. There's other herbs too. You also can use Gotu kola. By the way, like they sell those Gotu kola drinks. I don't really know what's in them. Probably there's a touch of Gotu kola and then sugar. So if you find that brain fog is your issue and you want to go to a protest, you would start taking the Gotu kola as soon as you can, like a week before or 2 weeks before. Like you want the Gotu kola doesn't work immediately to increase clarity, and it doesn't always work. That should be clear. But sometimes it's helpful over the course of time, and then you would take it afterwards as well. So Gotu kola is usually taken like in medium doses consistently. So 1/2 to 1 dropper full, 2 to 3 times a day for weeks or months. And that part's for mental clarity. What it's not so good at doing, though, what I talked about Calamus being good at, it's not so helpful when a bunch of intrusion happens to your mind and you just like lose your thoughts and you get foggy. That's more Calamus, or maybe even trying the fire cider, it's just like heat your brain up. Gotu kola is better for the long haul. So that's one thing. But the reason that I really bring it to protests is because it's one of the best herbs to increase connective tissue damage. So what I'm talking about are sprains and strains and rubber bullet wounds, right? So any place where your tissue's been punched at or twisted, your connective tissue takes the brunt of that, and you get sores or you get inflammation if it's on a joint. And Gotu kola is not going to do anything fast. Once again, it's not an herb that you take and you feel remedial effects from it right away. It's something that you take for a while to have those effects. But it's nice to at least start the process. So, and you can do it both internally and externally. So for instance, if I was at a protest and somebody, one of the most common injuries at protests are curbs. If they're urban, curbs. People are running, you don't see the curb, you hit the curb and your ankle twists out, or you hit the curb and you land on your wrist in a strong way. If this has happened to you or someone you know, you can write it in the chat. Hurt joint pain via curb. You could just say, yes, it's happened to me. But I'm telling you, really common. So there's a number of things you're going to do for soft tissue injuries. These are strains and sprains. But one of the things to do is you want to start getting that connective tissue more restored. And so what you can do is you can put like a Gotu kola liniment with some other herbs in it, and then you can start applying that to them topically, and then you put in the bottle and they can just keep applying it to the wrist or to the, often rubber bullets are in your torso, right, in your front or your back, and rub it in there, but it doesn't stop pain. What it's doing is increasing connective tissue integrity. So it's not maybe the first thing you give somebody, because the first thing you give to somebody for that is for pain, right? It hurts. It hurts to sprain yourself. It hurts to get hit by a rubber bullet. And so, but you could give some, and they can start rubbing a liniment on or an oil on, and then give it to them so they could take it, and maybe when they get home later, to continue that process to try to heal that connective tissue damage, or put it on their wrists. A little bottle won't last that long, but it's a beginning for it. So Gotu kola for connective tissue injuries. And so that includes getting hit, getting impact wounds, baton, if you get baton somewhere on your shoulder. You also need anti-inflammatories. Gotu kola is not an anti-inflammatory. Again, connective tissue restorer. We'll get to some anti-inflammatories. Let's just see what we got here. Yeah, and so people definitely, yeah, I don't know if you've ever been to a protest where it gets crazy, but when it does, like all common sense, I mean, when the police are coming at you and you get those flashbangs or rubber bullets or gassed, like common sense takes a back door for many people, for almost people, to safety, right? And so what I'm saying, you get stampedes and people get injured. One of the jobs of street medics is to be there, and you can't really break it up, but you can look for people who are more vulnerable and help protect them in those situations, and then give them herbs or medication or help there. I mean, street medics also provide a psychological role for people who are just having a very hard time at protests. But I'm going to say it again. This is a time for us to put our bodies out and minds out. If you can't go to a protest, there's lots of reasons for that, many excellent reasons. Maybe donate herbs or money or whatever you can do. And if you don't have to do anything, but I think it's a time where we can make change, and I hope that some long-term change happens starting at this point. But I'm not the person who has big hopes for humanity. I'd have to admit that. So that's it for Gotu kola. But you would give it to them internally, I haven't said that, and externally. So they're going to rub it on their wrists or on the baton injury. And also at the same time, it's going to be in a formula that they should take internally, because that way it gets into the bloodstream and reaches the injury via the bloodstream, via internal, systemic. The next thing is just an immune combination tincture. And then, so this is kind of similar to, I forgot what other immune herb, I talked about echinacea. But instead of just echinacea, if people tend to are immune compromised, or just tend to get sick easily, this is just a formula to take, but you would start taking this like at least 2 weeks before a protest, at least 2 weeks after the protest, and maybe much longer. So this is really not like at the protest medicine. So I should say that I'm going to be doing a class. I don't know if it's the next one or the one after, but I'm going to be doing a class on post-aftercare for protests. There's a lot of, there's so much post-aftercare, right? Because you go there and it's a triggering event, right? And then you physically get hurt. And so every medic should be well informed about post-care, what to do afterwards, and how to help people, and then how to stay in touch with them to move that forward, or just send them resources for them to research it themselves. So this one's pretty simple. This is a nice, just immune tonic. Remember that some people who have autoimmune problems, these can set them off. So just letting them know that. So if they feel a worsening of their symptoms, they should stop. And this combination is just basically equal parts echinacea, astragalus, and reishi mushrooms. Reishi mushrooms are Ganoderma, is a genus. I don't think you have to buy those really expensive products. There's lots of ways to make it without the very pricey products, but it does take a little bit of work to make good mushroom medicines. I'm not going to cover that here. There's excellent resources online. So instead, you buy your mushrooms and make your own medicine and save a lot of money. Pretty much you save a lot of money making all your herbal medicines. So that's it. It's just the same idea. So any questions or thoughts before I move on? Any questions on any of the herbs I've covered? For Gotu kola, I use fresh or dried. I've never purchased Gotu kola oil, so I have no idea who makes a good quality oil. It's such an easy oil to make. The herbs again, Kathy, are echinacea, astragalus, and reishi mushroom. Vicky, Gotu kola internally, you can take as a capsule, a tincture, or a tea. Those are the main ways: capsule, tincture, or tea. The immune, thank you. I'm not sure how to say your name. Tlazol? Thank you. Sorry if I'm horribly mispronouncing it. But what was the question again? The immune tonic is a tincture. So actually, let me just say thank you for that. In general, most of these things are tinctures. I just habitually use tinctures. But there's lots of reasons not to, but they're just easy to carry. They don't go bad in heat. So those are some of the reasons. But the immune combination was a tincture. You couldn't really make glyceride out of that because mushrooms and other starchy plants make terrible glycerites, and they only make mediocre tinctures. Ready for the next herb? Type yes if you're ready for the next herb. Yes, next herb, no? Right. This is just so I know that there are people out there, even if I horribly mispronounce their names. All right, thank you. So the next herb is Jamaican dogwood. Jamaican dogwood is one of my favorite pain remedies. And so I want to describe it a little bit and talk about what it's used for protests. But the main thing about Jamaican dogwood, so it's Pisidia piscipula. If you look it up, you'll just find it. Pisidia, kind of like the word Pisces because it means fish. Pisidia piscipula, which means fish poison. Jamaican dogwood it's just one of my favorites. So I wrote some really seriously long blogs on my website, sevensong.com, because I've gathered my own, and I finally got good quality Jamaican dogwood, which is often not in the market. And ever since I started making my own, I just really like it. The reason I like it is because it's a pain reliever that's non-sedative. It is not the strongest pain reliever I know, but it does two things. It's like a medium to mild pain reliever. For some things, it can help a lot. We'll get to those. But what it does really excellently, it increases the efficiency. It augments the pain relieving qualities of other herbs really well. So it works great with valerian or skullcap or hops or cramp bark. So don't ask about those plants right now, but it tends to increase their efficiency more than you would expect when you add Jamaican dogwood. So I rarely use it by itself. So here's what I'm looking at. Somebody was running at a protest and they fell and they hit their head, no concussion, perfectly conscious, their eyes are fine. But they're in a lot of pain, right? Maybe their neck hurts, right, from this fall. So they have an ice pack on their head, clearly cognitive, or, but they're just like, my body just hurts. Can you help with the pain? Really doesn't matter what kind of pain. I just use that as an example because that happens. So I might give them something like valerian and skullcap, and then an equal part of Jamaican dogwood. And I just find that it really increases the efficiency of other plants' pain relieving qualities, including things like menstrual cramps, which of course happen at protests. So Jamaican dogwood, if somebody's taking something like silk tassel, don't worry about the specific herbs, or black haw for their cramps, and it's helping, but not a lot, I'll throw some Jamaican dogwood in there, and sometimes it just does the trick. So Jamaican dogwood is a non-sedative pain reliever that is pain relieving by itself, but I find with other herbs, it really just augments their strength, and it's very safe. So that's mostly what I have to say. I've only ever used fresh and dried inner bark tincture of Jamaican dogwood. I've never used any other form, so I really have no idea how efficient or how good any other form is. So that all I can say is for the tincture at this point, which is too bad. But also the quality on the market is often not good. Again, the only way I've gotten it is I've gone and gathered it. So that's Jamaican dogwood. And the next herb Let's see. I think Mountain Rose Herbs does sell Jamaican dogwood. Hello, Ether people. While I mentioned Mountain Rose Herbs, I just want to point out, so I work in a free, this is a shout out to Mountain Rose because I do one pretty much every time because Mountain Rose is supported. I've been doing free work in various parts, street protests, free online videos. I work in a free clinic that we give herbs away for free, the Ithaca Free Clinic, if you're interested. And Mountain Rose and the people there have been so supportive of me throughout many years. And so I just really just want to thank you, Mountain. Thank you, Mountain Rose. Only the odd thing is they always seem to run out of roses, but this is the time of year to gather your own roses. So thank you, Mountain Rose. And just because I want to say it again, thank you, Michelle, for helping me with these. And seventh song, get back to the topic. Yes, I will. Glasses off, scattered, glasses on, sharp. So Japanese barberry and Oregon grapefruit are the next herbs. So you might have noticed when I talked about golden seal that I kept saying Japanese barberry. I think for all of us northeastern United States people, that's a lot of words to say, all of us who live here and live with Japanese barberry, which is in the Catskills is very weedy, that's what we should switch to. And the reason is because it works. Not just because it's weedy, but because that herb is really efficient. So what I'm talking about now is a plant called Japanese barberry. The genus is Berberis. The species is Thunbergii, Berberis thunbergii. But also, all you West Coast people and Rocky Mountain people can definitely use Oregon grapefruit. So Oregon grapefruit, there are many species, and it's also in the genus Berberis and the genus Mahonia. So the genus Mahonia is mostly now Berberis, but don't worry about it. Berberis, so pretty much anything in the genus Berberis or Mahonia can be used. Around here, I like to use the non-native Japanese barberry because it's really weedy. When I go down south and teach, by down south I mean the Catskills. When I go to the Catskills to teach, it's just so weedy. I mean, it's kind of terrible how invasive it is. So gather it. It's really hard to gather. So I wrote another way too long blog on how I gathered Japanese barberry because it was really hard. We used a winch. I had some people with good muscles on them, tried to get it out. It was a lot of work, and eventually we got it out, but man, it took a long time, and people way stronger than me helped me get it out. But then I had plenty, washed it, chopped it up. So here's what I'm saying. Japanese barberry is a really efficient medicine and has similar properties to golden seal. I'm going to talk about them. And Oregon grapefruit also works just as well. They just got to have that deep yellow color. That yellow color is berberine. Berberine is a colorful alkaloid. Well, I'm out of tea. I'll just have some sanitizer. Or maybe water instead. Don't do that. Don't put hand sanitizer in your mouth. It was hard to believe people really ate Tide Pods. God, human beings. So Japanese barberry is basically good for infections. That's its main use. It actually does other stuff. So I'm going to say this and then not spend any time there just to kind of annoy you and titillate you with some interesting information. But actually, all the barberries actually help with diabetes as well for type 2 diabetes. Now, just look it up. Just look up berberine type 2 diabetes. And you'll get a lot of information. I've written a lot about it, but if you just go to PubMed, there's lots of articles about it as well. And for protests, though, I'm really just using it for infections. And so very similar to golden seal, I'll make a liniment out of it in isopropyl alcohol, and I'll apply that if there's infections on the skin. And if there's any infections internally, respiratory infections or GI infections, if somebody has a urinary tract infection, I'll use it there. It's a medium to large dose medicine, and it has a very large loading dose. If I see somebody with an infection, let's say I'm working at a protest, and somebody shows me all the signs of a respiratory infection. So at this point, like, let's say I don't know it's COVID, let's say there's a seasonal flu happening where I am. My initial dose for them would be at least 2 full droppers in some water, too strong to take straight. And also, as Vicky pointed out, not a good idea to put droppers near the mouth. So, and then I might get a smaller dosage. But basically, when you're using berberis for medicine, You want medium to large doses and consistent. So you might give 1 dropper full 4 to 5 times a day, right? So it has some, so the barberries, Japanese barberry and the Oregon grapefruits have both antibacterial and antiviral action. So those are very different organisms, but there's action against both of them. You can look up some of the research on it, which is pretty good on both of these plants, or this very large group of plants, really. So I'll put them on wounds on the skin, which is almost always bacterial. I'll combine them with propolis or honey. And if somebody has an infection in the back of their throat, though I just want to point out that at protests, most people's sore throats are from yelling, right? They're from yelling, which dehydrates you, right? When you're yelling, whatever it is, yelling sounds like it's positive. I'm glad people are shouting. So, but it definitely dries your throat out, and just the yelling part or shouting part irritates your throat. Oregon grapefruit has no place here. For that, you can just give, the best thing is just bring cough drops and just suck on cough drops the whole time and moisten your throat. And if you can make medicated cough drops. Cough drops is how my whole family says it. And I was hoping I didn't say cough drops because I'm from Long Island, but apparently I said cough drops. So cough drops are really useful, but even like the sugary ones are good, right? Even like the Ludens, which basically have, like cherry Ludens has just like cherry sugar. I don't know what that stuff is, but actually sucking on it keeps it moist. And so that's useful. I've in the past had many different kinds of cough drops and just given them to people. Slippery elm cough drops are great for this. So I've changed subject. What I've said is most of the sore throats that I see at protests happen because people are yelling a lot and their throat gets dry and irritated and you want to soothe it. Just a little bit of honey and water can be useful. But if I look in their throat, that's a flashlight, and I look in their throat and it's red and irritated, or if there's any pustules back there, it's probably infected. And then one of the things I'll do is I can put some of this Japanese barberry or Oregon grapefruit, genus Berberis. You can put in some honey and they can kind of gargle it lightly and just get it to keep back there. You can add it in propolis so it'll stick longer because you want the herbs to come into contact with the throat itself. Again, though, often it's just sore from yelling. And then if they have any internal infections from whatever reason, then I might use it that way as well. So, yeah. So there's a question about salves. Salves are really useful, but they melt, right? And so, like if it's in the evening or if it's cool outside, salves are good. But if you're doing a protest daytime around now, often they melt and they are crazy messy in the backpack. But salves can be very useful. If you want to know the difference between a salve, an oil, and a liniment, I think it's at the end of the first class I gave. So please go to that and look at it, and I describe it in a lot of detail. So instead of doing that here, but salves have a place in this, but not for your throat, right? You know what? That's just mostly use salves when you have abrasions. You want it topical. So Oregon grapefruit, Japanese barberry, some of the best disinfectant herbs for bacterial and viral infections internally and externally. This stuff is great. Make liniments, glycerites. Make sure you make a good glycerite, tinctures, tea. Those are some of the forms you can use it. So I'm going to look at some of these questions, and then we'll go on to the next herb. It looks like Michelle's answering stuff. I've never tried Jamaican dogwood as a tea. I've never had enough of it. Val, by down south, I meant the Catskills of New York. Tlazol, are you gonna help me learn how to pronounce your name by spelling it phonetically, please? The root of Japanese barberry is what I use. Lizer, my Long Island accent, it's coming out. Lizer, I wish I could hear the giggles too. And DJ, yes, tons of cough drops. The cough drops are so good for these things. You just give them out, make sure that they're not contaminated. Yeah, somebody, Judy has acres of Japanese barberry. That's how it grows in the Catskills. And I just say hot dog. I don't know if I say that really weird. So I'm sorry. So if you're listening to this, you're like 7 songs, stay on point. I apologize. I'm reading questions. And also I need to have a little fun. Otherwise these things kind of get droll and, you know, more medicine stuff. So apologies. Maybe I should, Michelle and I can figure out like how to skip all the things that have nothing to do with medicine. All right. So the next herb is Kava. So Kava, Piper methysticum, it's the root of the plant, and I'm not going to say it. It's the root of the plant, and Kava has some similarities to cannabis. Cannabis is what people call marijuana now. So it's also the genus of the plant, of course. So the reason I'm saying that Kava and cannabis have in common is that they have varieties, and the varieties do matter. Like, I don't know if you have like strong hops or weak hops, it's just kind of hopsy effect in general. But I don't know if, it, you know, honestly, I'm not just saying this because it's legal or some reason. I don't use cannabis, but I've watched that many people have very different effects from the different strains of cannabis. Of course they do, right? And Kava has that too. So if you've ever tried it and didn't like it, or liked it and didn't like it the next time, it's actually the strain that you're purchasing at that time. So the strains matter in Kava. I'm going to say where I get it from. So because they're good friends of mine and they sell excellent fresh roots. So if you ever bought it by fresh Kava, I get it from Tane, T-A-N-E, Datta, D-A-T-T-A. The name of their company is Adaptations, and they're in Captain Cook, Hawaii. And I like fresh root tincture. That's why I get it. So Tane gets it from other people who live on the island that grow it organically, and then he sells it. That's a bit expensive to ship it here because the second day, but I said I wouldn't do this. Anyway, that's where I get Kava root from. And I get the fresh root from Adaptations in Hawaii. And then I tincture it, and that's my favorite form of Kava. You can also buy it in powder, in capsules, glycerites. So there's other forms of it as well. So why all this fuss about Kava? I'll be right there. That's my getting up and move my body a second. So Kava can play a really positive role in protests, but you have to understand what Kava is. So people talk a lot, there's a lot of words associated with it, but I would say that it's a disinhibitor. And so that's an important term. So it's dose dependent. Kava is not only variety dependent, it's also dose dependent. And the dose of Kava can either be like just very mellowing or disinhibiting it. So here's what disinhibiting is. If you've ever drank in alcohol, ethanol, what happens when people drink alcohol, the reason that people can get kind of happy on it is because basically you have very little else on your mind, right? So normally our minds are clustered with all this information and you're trying to enjoy yourself. And then there's like thinking about this and thinking about that and thinking about November, which I think way too much about November. And then you drink alcohol. So I'm not much of an alcohol drinker either. But you drink it and then you're like, oh, I feel better. Why do you feel better? You're feeling better because your mind is not crowded with thoughts. It's also why people say some really stupid stuff when they drink alcohol or people get violent. So that's basically you lose your inhibitions, right? Disinhibiting. So Kava can have that effect too, but in smaller amounts, depending how much. So Kava's low to large dosage, depending on the individual person. And often what it does, my favorite place for Kava at a protest is after like the major scrum has happened, like after like things have died back or you've gone someplace, now you're all wired up, you're tired, your body's tired, your mind's like very wired up, and you want to relax, but still be present. Maybe you have to drive home or whatever you have to do. Kava can be really useful. So again, it could be anywhere from like a half a dropper full to 2 dropper fulls. It's just your personal sensitivity to the plant. But also could just help initially too. So you know, you're getting ready to go to a protest and you're just nervous about going, you have too many thoughts, did I bring everything, or what's going to happen to me? I mean, those are good questions, right? Was COVID going to be there? Should I get a COVID test when I come back? I'm coming back. And anyway, lots of thoughts. Kava in, you know, like a half dropper to a dropper full, often just, you know, chills people out just a little bit, stops some of the excess thoughts, which can be very positive. So Kava is good that way. So I suggest that the other thing that Kava could be really helpful is for sleeping. So if you're somebody with a very active mind before you go to sleep, you can try taking Kava. I suggest taking it though a half hour to an hour beforehand. Because Kava is a disinhibitor, when you first take Kava, often when you first take it, often you feel good and awake, right? Just like alcohol can do. So they feel different. They feel different in the body, Kava and alcohol. But when you first take it, sometimes like, oh, I have less thoughts in my head and I have all these projects I want to do. But if it's close to you go to sleep, you know, you'll kind of get a little awake. Oh, you know, my mind is not as cluttered. And then often tiredness can set in. So it's really helpful. You can mix with other herbs, but often Kava can be helpful. At protests, when I go to protests, often it's not in Ithaca, so I'm not at home. So I'm going to somebody's house, which is a strange house to me. Maybe there's all these other street medics. It's kind of a whirlwind. And I have a crazy hard time sleeping with people around. So Kava can be really helpful for me, other people in these situations. So bringing a good sized bottle to share with other people as well. So you can get Kava hangovers if you drink too much, but it's really nice that way. So again, Kava is nice if you just all wound up, you want to do something, but you want to relax a little bit and then go to the protest, be present at the protest, but not feel overwhelmed. Kava could be helpful, but it's pretty strong. There are many other herbs like Damiana, Tulsi, Rose, that also help relax, but are not nearly as strong. It might bring you down a couple of notches, but your brain is pretty much working just as well. But again, dose dependent, and you can try mixing and matching these kinds of things. So I think that's mostly Kava. So it's good for frayed nerves after the protest. Yeah, I'm gonna see what kind of questions we have here. Vicky likes the Kava dreams. And I think that's it. Yeah. So you can tell Tane I sent you. I won't get a discount, so I'm not doing it for that reason. Tane, his partner, and Maureen, his daughter, are all Safi, are all close friends. So I'm just saying, I mean, pretty much most of the people I recommend I like. I'm not recommending like Mitch McConnell to buy anything from him, right? So anything. So Kava, tincture, tea, glyceride, powder, capsules. And then the next herb is licorice. A little bit of water. The Herbalist's cup, the mason jar. It is a pretty cool cup too. Licorice is a really useful plant. So first, let's cover the reason not to use licorice. There are two reasons not to use licorice. One is people hate licorice. So write in the chat box if you hate licorice. You just write, I'm a licorice hater, however you want to write it. Licorice haters, go for it. Just get your hate out there. Get your licorice hate and expel it into the chat box. So you have to tell people it has it. I mean, out of all even though I give a lot of disgusting flavors of herbs, licorice for some people is like, it's the end of the conversation. That will not go in their body. So more importantly though, if you're taking licorice for longer periods of time, licorice can raise blood pressure. So it does it in a specific method like aldosterone. So I'm not going to go into the details. You can read about them. I don't use deglycerinated licorice. So the thing that's called DGL, I don't use. So I'm just not talking about that. I'm not going to talk about it. But at a protest, if you're giving licorice for the reasons I'm going to suggest temporarily, it's probably fine. if the person's going to take licorice for long periods of time and they're hypertensive or have high blood pressure, probably avoiding licorice is a really good idea. So just read about that if that interests you. So why use licorice? Licorice, I'm getting a little fuzzy in here. I'm not sure what that is. Millions of little dots, maybe, I don't think it's in the air. So licorice is low to large dose. We've already talked about when not to use it. And it's anti-inflammatory and emulsant. So there are two main uses of licorice at protests. It is an excellent internal anti-inflammatory agent. That means it reduces inflammation. And it's demulcent. Demulcent means it has a mucousy or an oatmeal-y or like a thick consistency to it. And so those two qualities together could be really helpful. And where it's really helpful is after your lungs have been gassed and you're just having a hard time breathing. So first breathe, but after a while, your lungs are going to be irritated. Licorice could be really helpful for those irritated, gassed lungs. Again, as an anti-inflammatory and as a demulcent. So I want to say the best way to use licorice, which is not easy to do on the run, but is easier to do later, is you take licorice powder and you put it in water. So like a cup like this, I might put a teaspoon, really about a half a teaspoon of licorice powder. So it's got to be powdered well. And then add about this much water and stir it and drink it. The powder in water is the best way to get both the demulcent, that thick consistency, and the anti-inflammatory action, because you're getting a lot of licorice. So there are other forms of licorice, like that you can tincture it, you can make tea with it, but really powder is the best, followed by tea. Everything else is 10 steps away. So you want those starches, you want the licorice has a bunch of constituents. Many of them are polysaccharides or sugars, and that's a large part of its medicinal quality. And so that's going to be best extracted in water. So one more time, if your lungs are irritated, if you have the potential, you have the chance, you have the powder, just put some powder in water, put it to consistency to taste, and just drink it down and do it a few times a day. So licorice is really good for that, for both inflammation due to the gas, getting gassed, pepper sprayed, tear gas, any of it, all of it hurts the lungs. Well, it's fine powder that you're getting in there, you know, so hopefully you got a mask on, but stuff gets in. So I would suggest it for that. But also I do have it in tincture form that I can give to people at the protest. But what I really recommend, you know, what you can do is make small baggies of it and give that to people to take with them. You can hear about this in my first one, but remember, if you're a street medic, you're as likely to get arrested, sometimes more likely to get arrested as anybody, and all your stuff at least temporarily confiscated. It happens all the time. So, but enough about that. I talk a lot about that. Is that bug by me? So, licorice you can use it for external, like sprains and strains, but some of my favorite uses is for inflammation of your respiratory tract and your GI tract. So your stomach and intestines. So if somebody's at a protest and they ate some bad food, or they ate some food that they ate some gluten and they usually don't eat gluten, or some food that they don't usually eat because they were hungry and that was available. And then they have diarrhea, and then their GI tract just really hurts. To stop the pain, you're going to use what are called antispasmodics. We'll get to those later. But to help with the inflammation, again, licorice can be really helpful. So it's helpful for both inflammation in the GI tract, your gastrointestinal or stomach and intestines, and also your respiratory tract. So licorice is a really handy plant. And as some people wrote, if you read, some people really love the flavor. So I like licorice, but I know from experience that many people don't. You know, and so if somebody has bad stomach pains, you can add licorice, and then you could add herbs that help with the pain itself. And that would include things like catnip, fennel, and meadowsweet. I've talked about catnip and fennel, meadowsweet, and now I'm adding fennel. They just feel good in the gut. Some of them are carminative, so it helps with gas. It helps your body absorb gas, so it's not in your gut causing pain. But really, licorice is for irritated mucous membranes. Mucous membranes line your GI tract and your respiratory tract. And it's also useful, Well, it doesn't mean we. It's mostly used internally. I do give it though for people who have also injured themselves in soft tissue injuries. So if people sprain their wrist or their ankle or their shoulder, I also give licorice, but I give it internally. I don't use licorice externally. So in that case, again, it's the tea for it. I do use the tincture because it's so convenient, but it's just so better in water. So let me see if there's any questions about that. We have about 15 minutes left. And licorice people are divided. Look at that. The question from Rachel is, will it help people who are hypotensive? I don't really know. It acts like aldosterone, so my guess is probably not. So, but you can look it up. It's really there's a lot of information about licorice, so it's pretty good. By the way, some of my friends who live in China, well, a friend who lives in China and been around a lot of COVID, and is also a TCM practitioner, traditional Chinese medicine practitioner. He said in China, one of the main herbs used for COVID and lung inflammation is licorice, and it makes perfect sense. And so, I would trust his information. I do trust his information. So we can probably get one or two more herbs in here. The next herb is Lobelia. Lobelia is Lobelia inflata. So it's the only Lobelia I use. And so it's Lobelia inflata. That's usually the one that's in the market. The preparations that I use for Lobelia are fresh plant. I don't really like the dried plant medicines. There's lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of plants that I think are great dried. Lobelia is just not one of them. Like licorice, chamomile. So Lobelia, fresh plant tincture or fresh plant vinegar. Those are the two ways. Lobelia just has a history of being used as a vinegar. So Lobelia does a lot of stuff. Lobelia is one of those plants, the more I use it in different kinds of situations, the more I find uses for it. But in protests, it has one specific, very useful thing and one minor thing. And that is, it's a bronchodilator. So if somebody has asthma and what they generally use is albuterol, a bronchodilating inhaler, then it's a consideration. If when they have asthma, they use a steroid inhaler, it won't do much. Lobelia acts like albuterol, not like a steroid. In other words, it's a bronchodilator, not an anti-inflammatory. Lobelia works sometimes amazingly well. Anybody who studied with me will have heard me say this, but I would say it's one of the strongest gateway herbs. And so by gateway herb, it means people are like, I don't believe herbs work, which is kind of silly because all humans all over the world have used them. Just because modern medicine is amazing at times doesn't mean that herbs of all of a sudden don't work, right? Anyway, so the reason I call it gateway herb is because often when people have bronchoconstriction, which is usually a part of asthma, it can really help them. It won't help the inflammation, but it'll help them breathe better by dilating the bronchi, the breathing tubes in your body. So here's something though to know. If somebody gets gassed, don't give Lobelia. If they have difficulty breathing after getting gassed, absolutely not. Because what you're going to do is you're going to open up their bronchi, which is going to allow any particulate matter to get deeper into their lungs. So if you're around gases, right, if you're around tear gas, pepper spray, any of that's getting into people's mouths or throats, sinuses and going down, do not use Lobelia. You don't want them to start opening, you don't want those bronchi even more wide. So the time though to use it is when people have when they're having asthma attacks and you're trying to open up their bronchi. You can use it with albuterol. You can do so Lobelia is a low dose herb, meaning that you just take like 5 to 10 drops as often as necessary. So I'm going to stay there for a minute and then come back to what I was saying. Lobelia has a reputation for being poisonous. That is inaccurate. Every once in a while, it does make people vomit. It's acrid, and it's acrid in the throat, meaning it's kind of stingy acid feeling, and acrid in the stomach. So some people do vomit from it. It's not that common, but it's very different than being toxic. So I've given as most of my fellow first aid herbalists have given gallons of this stuff over the years because it's so useful, but it's a low dose herb. It's really the first low dose herb I've mentioned. So usually what you do is you give a small amount of it, like this amount, at a time, or even a little less, and then do that thing I said. Give them a small amount, ask them 2 minutes later how they feel. If they say they're breathing a little better, give them more, another small amount, until it's not helping, and then you stop. I would also suggest, though, at that point, putting maybe this much in the bottle, maybe a fifth, fill the rest with water, and then if they're having more asthma and no gases around, they can do a capful as often as they need. So maybe about a fifth of the bottle, the rest with water, then a capful as often as they need. So not that much of an amount because of the dilution. So that's, Lobelia is always in my first aid kit. The other thing, for some people, it helps their stress headaches. So if you get stress headaches, meaning that when you're under stress, like protests or giving presentations online that'll be recorded, Lobelia can help. It doesn't help that often, but occasionally it's really worth it. So here it is. You go to the protest and you know, all this information, maybe it's hot outside, you're drinking plenty of water, and your head's starting to hurt. Try just a few drops of Lobelia and see if it helps. And Lobelia does much more than this, but that's what I want to stay with for this conversation. It's really great stuff. In other words, it's a good medicinal plant. All right. Any questions? We have about 9 minutes left. Anything personal to ask Eliza? Because please don't ask me personal questions. All right. So we could probably cover 1 or 2 more herbs. Michelle will eventually, probably not eventually, but pretty soon, this will be online. I will post where it'll be on YouTube, on Instagram and Facebook. I will also do it in skywriting over the whole country. Every city will have skywriting about where this is, right? So not really, sorry. Sorry, Eliza, I'm probably not gonna get the Pleurisy root this time. We're gonna just keep going in alphabetical order. So the next herb is the herb on everybody's mind, of course, which is lousewort. Lousewort, as in L-O-U-S-E, wort. The plant is pedicularis, is the genus pedicularis. Can you say that with me? Pedicularis. And pedicularis is a skeletal muscle relaxant. So it's not so well known. One of my main teachers is an herbalist who died about 10 years ago named Michael Moore, not the video movie person. Michael Moore was one of my main teachers. He used a lot of Southwestern and Rocky Mountain plants, a huge influence in me as an herbalist. I would suggest if you want to read Michael Moore's books, I liked him. He has a really strong and cutting sense of humor and also really knew his herbs. Real sad that he died when he did. But what I guess I'm saying is it's less known here in the East, but pedicularis or lousewort, those words are interchangeable here, is a skeletal muscle relaxant. So why do you use skeletal muscle relaxants is when your neck, shoulders, and back hurt. So often the neck, shoulder, and back hold a lot of tension in them, and they just get injured easily. You pick up something, you pick up a large rock in the wrong way, and then your back just hurts. So it doesn't help for all back pain, but it's worth a try. But at a protest, if it happens acutely, so let's say we're at a first aid clinic and we're moving a bunch, all of a sudden the police are coming, like, let's move all these 5-gallon jugs of water from here to over there so they don't get knocked over and batoned over. And somebody picks up one of the 5-gallon jugs in the wrong way and hurts their back. One of the first herbs I would give them is pedicularis, otherwise known as lousewort. Pedicularis is just a scientific name of the plant. I like it better than lousewort. It's a medium to large dose plant, and mostly I use it in tincture form. So I'm going to repeat all of that. So lousewort, or pedicularis, the botanical name for it, is, I usually put it in tincture form. I like it as fresh plant if possible, and I give it to people who have just hurt their back, shoulders, or neck often from picking something up or from just some uncomfortable position. The other time to use it, let's say you've gone to Washington, D.C. to protest, and you live where I live, or much further away. You've traveled in a car for many hours, you get out of the car and you're all tight. Another really good use for radicularis to relax the shoulders, back. It doesn't affect mental capacity. It doesn't have, it doesn't make people tired or spacey. It often doesn't work, but when it does work, it works like medium good. Like Lobelia, that plant, when that works, it's like, damn, I'm breathing again. Radicularis is more like, oh, I feel a little bit better now, a little more relaxed. I can carry my backpack all day at this protest. It's more like that. So as we end, are there any questions that I didn't cover that you would like me to answer? Last couple of folks here. So something that I could just spend a few minutes on rather than covering one more plant and going kind of fast. This is your opportunity to ask the snarky herbalist some questions. All right. So instead, I'll cover one more herb. Seems very reasonable. Actually, let me look at these questions. Blue Velvet asks, are antimicrobial herbs like Oregon grapefruit good for immediate wound care? The answer is yes. I mean, you don't have an infection. The infection happens later, but I would put it on to help prevent infections. So yes, immediate wound care. Hey, Kathleen. Hey there, Kat. I did not cover what to do when people get, I did cover some herbs, what to do for when people get pepper spray or gas in their lungs. The main thing I talked about, though, is not using Lobelia to open the lungs up further. And my favorite herb for that is actually licorice. So just to cover it again, Kat, as an anti-inflammatory and emulsant. Those are my favorites. I haven't covered propolis, but Anna's asking about it. So first, you're not really, all right, just answer it. So propolis, I use a lot of propolis. I'm actually trying to switch to pine tree resins because I can gather it myself and I don't have to worry about the source of propolis, which is expensive. Just to put some of my favorite herb people are Andrea and Matthias Reisen at Healing Spirits. And they buy propolis from another beekeeper and they sometimes sell it. But I would just, whatever you can do to support Andrea and Matthias Reisen of Healing Spirits in Avoca, New York. They're amazing people. And so there's that. I don't use AMI at all, so I don't have much use for that. I'm sorry, it's getting towards the end and I'm saying things that I probably should be saying. So Kathy's question, when can you collect pine pollen? I wasn't talking about pine pollen, I was talking about pine resin. So the resins from propolis is a resin from tree buds. And so I'm hoping to start, well, I'm really getting a Long Island accent tonight. I'm hoping to just start gathering resins from various pines to make my own antimicrobial propolis-like medicine. So that I've only done some, it's not that easy, but pine trees are common and pine trees make a lot of resin. Somebody just asked about Kava. It is not easy to find adaptations. So go online, so Kava, back to that. Go, just type in adaptations Hawaii. There'll be a website that shows microgreens. That is them. Just contact them through them. Their website thing is not so strong yet, but you can find them. But it's Tane Data who you're looking for. All right, folks. I think that's it for me. I hope that this went well for you. You can throw a little chat in if this went well, or you can put a little chat if it didn't go well. And if you have comments or questions after this gets put on YouTube, you can leave the comments or questions underneath the video. Kat Meyer was just on here for a minute. If you want to meet another amazing herbalist and you're in Virginia, Kat is a longtime devoted plant person and herbalist with lots of heart and lots of brain. So that's a great person to speak to as well. And I think that's it. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to close down. And of course, thank you, Michelle. You are amazing. And bye, folks.